This is the Shining Stars of Humanity series, where we examine the most fundamental ideas developed by the most remarkable thinkers humanity has ever produced. In this episode, we explore the life and philosophy of Albert Camus. Albert Camus was born on November 7, 1913, in Algeria, which at the time was a French colony. He was not only a philosopher, but also a novelist, playwright, journalist, and political thinker. In 1957, at the age of 44, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature, becoming one of the youngest recipients in history and the first laureate in literature born on the African continent. Camus is best known for works such as The Stranger, The Plague, The Myth of Sisyphus, The Fall, and The Rebel. These writings explore themes of meaning, suffering, rebellion, moral responsibility, and the human condition, and they continue to influence readers across the world today. He was born into a poor working-class family of European descent in French Algeria. His father was a low-paid agricultural worker who was killed during the First World War when Camus was only a few months old. His mother, who was partially deaf and illiterate, worked as a cleaning woman. There were no books in the home, and the family lived in a poor neighborhood of Algiers. Growing up with extreme material deprivation had a lasting impact on Camus and deeply shaped his worldview, instilling in him a lifelong sensitivity to injustice, suffering, and human dignity. When Camus began attending secondary school, the lycée, he felt like a stranger. He came from a poor suburb and suddenly found himself surrounded by boys from middle-class families with privileges he had never known. Over time, however, he distinguished himself and became a well-known figure in university circles. He was admired, charismatic, and attracted considerable attention. Camus was also deeply passionate about football, once stating, "All that I know most surely about morality and obligations I owe to football." At the age of 17, Camus was struck by tuberculosis. The illness interrupted both his studies and his physical life, forcing him to confront vulnerability and mortality at a young age. During this period, he became fascinated by theater and acting. He organized an avant-garde dramatic group called the Theatre de l'Équipe, believing theater could serve as a moral and communal force rather than mere entertainment. Camus later married Francine, a pianist and mathematician who gave birth to twins, Catherine and Jean. In 1939, his play Caligula appeared, portraying the psychological descent of a Roman emperor driven to cruelty and madness. Shortly afterward, Camus published The Stranger and the philosophical essay The Myth of Sisyphus, works that would firmly establish his reputation. When Germany invaded France in 1940, Camus was living in Paris. Though he attempted to flee the city, he ultimately remained and joined the French resistance. During the occupation, he became editor-in-chief of the underground newspaper Combat, which he had helped found. Combat was widely read, particularly among students, and published daily articles condemning oppression, tyranny, and injustice. After the war, Camus devoted himself entirely to writing. He traveled widely, gave lectures, and became an international public intellectual. Despite fame, he lived a relatively frugal life, aside from dressing elegantly. Politically, he aligned with the left, but firmly opposed totalitarianism. He rejected the Soviet model under Stalin and leaned toward an ethical form of anarchism, emphasizing individual responsibility, moral limits, and human dignity. During the Algerian War of Independence, Camus took a deeply controversial position. He refused to support either colonial repression or revolutionary violence, advocating instead for a pluralistic, multicultural Algeria. This stance satisfied almost no one and left him isolated, yet it reflected his profound concern for human life on all sides of the conflict. He wrote candidly about his anguish, stating that he felt torn between justice and loyalty to the land of his childhood. Philosophically, Camus is most closely associated with the idea of the absurd. He argued that human beings naturally seek meaning, order, and reason in a universe that offers none. This clash between our longing for meaning and the universe's indifference produces the absurd. Though many labeled him an existentialist, Camus consistently rejected the term, preferring to focus on how one should live with honesty, courage, and compassion in an indifferent world. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus begins by stating that there is only one truly serious philosophical problem: suicide. Judging whether life is worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. He rejects both physical suicide and what he calls philosophical suicide, which includes embracing comforting belief systems, religious or ideological, that provide false certainty and relieve anxiety at the cost of intellectual honesty. Camus argued that many belief systems function as escapes from uncertainty, such as the belief in ultimate justice, where good is always rewarded and evil punished. Life, however, does not operate this way. Its randomness and unpredictability create insecurity. To accept false certainties in order to escape this discomfort, Camus argued, is to commit a kind of mental suicide. The absurd man, in Camus' view, is someone who confronts this uncertainty honestly, without appeal to illusions. Suicide, paradoxically, is not an option for the absurd man, because it represents surrender rather than rebellion. True defiance lies in continuing to live fully despite the lack of ultimate meaning. Camus famously illustrates this condition through the mythological figure of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder uphill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down again. What makes Sisyphus tragic is not the labor itself, but his awareness of its futility. Yet Camus concludes that the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. For Camus, revolt is a constant stance rather than a single act. It is the maintenance of lucidity in the face of suffering and injustice. He wrote that revolt is a confrontation between human beings and their own obscurity, a refusal to resign oneself to despair. In The Rebel, Camus warns that rebellion without moral limits can devolve into tyranny, citing the horrors of totalitarian regimes under Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. Camus distinguished genuine rebellion from nihilistic rebellion. Genuine rebellion affirms shared human values and seeks solidarity, freedom, and relative harmony. "I revolt, therefore we exist," he wrote, emphasizing the collective dimension of human suffering and resistance. In The Plague, Camus presents these ideas through fiction. The novel depicts a deadly epidemic that ravages the city of Oran, destroying half its population. The plague represents the absurd, irrational, unjust, and indifferent. The response, Camus suggests, is not heroism, but decency. Dr. Ryu, the novel's protagonist, simply does his job, tirelessly working to reduce suffering. The only way to fight the plague, Camus writes, is with decency. Camus was influenced deeply by Dostoevsky, particularly The Brothers Karamazov and The Devils. The character Ivan Karamazov, with his atheistic rebellion and moral anguish, resonated strongly with Camus. Using his Nobel Prize money, Camus later adapted The Devils for the stage, directing it to critical acclaim. Camus' final completed novel, The Fall, published in 1957, explores guilt, hypocrisy, and moral failure through the character of Camus, a lawyer haunted by his refusal to help a woman in danger. The novel is often read as a confession, reflecting Camus' own moral struggles and personal losses. In 1960, Camus was killed in a car accident while returning to Paris. In his pocket was an unused train ticket. Among the wreckage were pages of a handwritten manuscript, an epic novel he believed would be his finest work. Published posthumously as The First Man, it offered the most intimate portrait of Camus' life and character. Albert Camus teaches us that life has no inherent meaning, yet immense value. His philosophy rejects nihilism and affirms life with lucidity, compassion, and courage. He stands as a guide for those who face a world without easy answers, yet choose integrity anyway.